The Civil War was fake and it had nothing to do with slavery. There were 5 slave states in the North. Delaware didn't recognize the 13th Amendment until 1901. Several of these states kept slaves until the 1900s because you could keep their children as slaves until they were in their 20s, aka slaves for a term, and they were still property. Some called it forced apprenticeship, lasting to the mid-20th century. America is the land of Civil War. There were 500 years of Civil War before colonialism. Colonialism is the expansion and exploitation of those civil wars. The American Revolution was a slave uprising. The pale slaves were uprising against their swarthy leadership. And like other reset wars, they were just destroying the cities. And they didn't actually win the war. These are not George Washington coins, they are King George coins. And it was cheaper for Britain to let the colonies protect themselves. So the slaves gained some status, burned some cities, and started moving south and west. That's why the Seminole Wars precipitated the Civil War. And that's why the Seminoles fought alongside the South. And these natives were so-called black. That's why the Spanish used the Moor to communicate with them. Look at Tuscaloosa. That's why the English used a so-called slave named Abraham that knew the land better than the Cherokee and the English. And right after the Seminole Wars, we get the Carrington event, a reset that breaks down the communication across the country. There have been at least 5 resets and endless reset wars surrounding those resets. There was a major reset in the 1400s that brought us out of the so-called Star Fort era. And there was a major reset in the late 1600s that many refer to as the Mud Flood. That's why parts of Jamaica and Panama, among other places, sank. The reset period leading up to the Civil War also brought about the Great Flood of California, basically turning it into an island again, which happens about every 200 years. The Civil War was about pale slavery and economics. Look. Pale slavery and economics. Look. After wiping out the history in the cities of the North, they began to wipe out the South. This was total war, total destruction of the history, up and down the East Coast, eventually wrapping around in the Anaconda Plan. It was mostly destruction, that's why there's no battle photos, even though cameras like this existed. And the fake photos are endless. They cut his face and pasted it here, just like Lincoln. They could get this photo but not any in battle. This cannon looks destroyed. These battle shirts look sus. And there's no uniformity to these uniforms. Look, what team is anybody on? And these dudes look sus. Pause, yo. These are straight up clones with the fake background. Who looks like this? The Civil War set the precedent for income tax and drafts. Apparently no one wanted to fight in it. The Civil War brought us orphan asylums, which were reset programming centers, colored asylums for the stolen aboriginals, soldiers' asylums for those that knew the truth about the war, and asylums for the fake natives to make sure they played their part in the reset. The cities were mostly destroyed, and they were still mostly empty. Ghost cities with beautiful architecture and mud roads. This was supposedly Robert E. Lee's house, which became Arlington Cemetery. And many of these cemeteries are just used to hide what's beneath them. These are not benevolent factions. The 13th Amendment reinvented slavery. This was part of a series of reset wars to turn us all into slaves. Cities melted down in resets. Stone Mountain is a structure that melted. Then most of what survived in the city was destroyed, reset, and repopulated.